Read my lips, no new taxes. Those were the famous words by former Republican U.S. President George Bush Sr., whose words would later come to bite him after the Democratic-controlled Senate voted to increase taxes in 1990 to fund a national deficit. Well, taxes, levies, duties, and tariffs remain in the spotlight in Nigeria as the government mulls a telecoms tax in loan discussions with the World Bank. Who wins and who loses in the Nigerian economy? Good morning. It's another power-packed episode of Business Week. I'm here to help you catch up. As always, stay tuned for the big business stories of the past week. I'm Rolake Akinkugbe-Filani. As always, we'll take a look at global energy commodities, and look at that, it's all red, a clean sweep of red. WTI, Brent, natural gas, and RBOB gasoline are down. Fed rates likely a higher for longer scenario. So not come down in future Fed decisions in the US as analysts expect, and that might be a dampener on demand. So all markets reacting to that in advance, minus 1.1 percentage down. Let's take a look at what's happening in equity markets around the world. Of course, starting with our own local market here in Nigeria. The all-share index on the Nigeria Stock Exchange was down at the close of trading on Friday by 0.02%. A little over 8,000 deals, market cap still hovering around the 55.5 trillion naira mark. But it's not only Nigeria that's moving and shaking this week in Africa. The other African markets are also in the news. So let's take a look at what's happening here. Johannesburg Stock Exchange had a good end to the week with the JSE up by 1.19%. Ghana, unfortunately, was down by 0.05%. And Safaricom Group PLC, which recently announced its results, saw an increase in the share price, which helped to move the Nairobi Stock Exchange up by 1.37%. Of course, its own share price also rising after publishing a growth in earnings in its last reporting period. And in Morocco, in Casablanca, the stock exchange was up by 0.36%. Let's take a look at Wall Street markets. Yes, Wall Street, not a bad picture. Dow Jones Industrial Index was up by 25 basis points. Standard & Poor's was up by 0.05%, but NASDAQ tech stocks down by 0.14%. Here are my top picks around the world for the past week. I'm going to be starting in Nigeria. The Nigerian government is looking at reintroducing a telecoms tax that it had put on hold in July 2023, shortly after President Tinubu came into government. And that's because it's looking at a $750 million loan package with the World Bank. If you recall, last year, the government had looked at introducing a 5% excise duty and also an import tax levy on vehicles. So other manufacturers of goods and others may also be affected by the tax introduction under the ARMOR program of the Nigerian government. We'll be keeping a very close watch on that because there's lots of controversies around taxes across the Nigerian economy right now. Cameroon chocolate makers are not having a really good season. Why? Because cocoa prices have now reached an all-time high. And one of the reasons for this, Cameroon, of course, producing around 300,000 metric tons of cocoa annually. So it's the world's fourth biggest producer of cocoa. Basically, farmers are feeling the pinch of constricted supply. Over 2 or 3 past cocoa seasons, there hadn't been enough investment. Yields were falling on cocoa plantations. And now chocolate makers in the country are feeling the squeeze from high prices. But it's not just Cameroon. Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana to a less extent, because in those countries prices are fixed, but here you have a fully liberalized market. So what happens at the farm does impact what happens along the value chain and ultimately at the farm gate. We'll see how that pans out. The IMF has said global trade and FDI are now being seriously impacted by geopolitical tensions around the world. And it cited 2 specific instances. The war between Russia and Ukraine is rebalancing global trade routes. That's a big one because the imports into Europe and outside of Europe to and from Russia have declined significantly since the Russia-Ukraine crisis kicked off 2 plus years ago now. And of course, let's not forget tensions between the US and China, which has seen the trade between both countries decline. Imports from China and the US have declined. and the reverse is true. And you may ask, then given these tensions, why are we even seeing a bigger impact on FDI and global trade? Well, because many countries are now rerouting their trade flows away from those key geopolitical hubs. Biden, speaking of China and the US, Biden is looking at increasing taxes on electric vehicles from China from 25% to 100%. Now, this is really major because the US and China have been at this for ages, as we all know. It's the new Cold War, the new tech war, call it whatever you may, but Biden is not letting down at all, especially in an election season in the US. So this is a big one we're going to keep an eye on. There's going to be about a 2.5% increase in taxes on all other vehicles from China, but electric vehicles are going to see a whopping rise in import taxes, especially those being sourced from China. And finally, here on the African continent, Safaricom PLC, the second most valuable company in East Africa on the market, came in well below its profit forecast on the back of losses in Ethiopia, which is a relatively new market for Safaricom. And in fact, those losses in Ethiopia were due to foreign exchange losses, which came to the tune of about 89 billion Kenyan shillings. Although the group's earnings overall has grown, and net operating profit for Safaricom did grow to $1.07 billion. That is a record in the listed telecoms group's history. That's even my top picks for the week. And now for a look at other stories from around the world. We'll start with telecoms again. Multinational Airtel Africa PLC published its complete financial statement for the period ended March 31, or the year ended 2024, its fiscal reporting period, compared to the $750 million profit after taxes reported in the prior fiscal year. The company's $89 million loss after taxes during the current year is a considerable fall, and it's partly due to the depreciation of the Nigerian naira. Airtel reported foreign exchange losses of $770 million. After reporting $5.26 billion in revenues in the full year 22 to 23, Airtel Africa's revenue in the most recent reporting period dropped to $4.98 billion. That's a 5.3% reduction. Let's take a look at what the CBN here is doing in Nigeria. This past week, the CBN told financial institutions that a 0.5% levy intended to raise money to enhance cybersecurity will take effect in 2 weeks. Banks are required by the central bank to implement the cybersecurity levy deduction procedure, which will be overseen by the National Security Advisor's Office. The 0.5% deduction of the value of all electronic transactions to the National Cybersecurity Fund, which will be managed by the Office of the National Security Advisor, is stipulated in the 2024 Cybercrime Prohibition, Prevention and Amendment Act of 2024. And we'll be talking about that a bit later in the program with my guest. Well, over to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe will fine businesses using inflated exchange rates as the government battles to maintain the value of its newly introduced gold-backed currency, the Zimbabwe Gold, the ZiG, Z-I-G. Any business using an exchange rate higher than the official rate of 13.5 ZiG per US dollar will be liable for a fine of 200,000 ZiG. That's about 14,000 US dollars, according to a government notice. And anyone offering goods or services at a rate above the prevailing interbank foreign currency selling rate will be guilty of a civil infringement, read the notice, which was issued late on Thursday. Still on the African continent, Amazon has announced the launch of Amazon.co.za, providing customers in South Africa with a new online shopping experience. Available by either downloading the Amazon shopping app or visiting Amazon.co.za on your desktop or mobile browsers, customers can now discover and shop from a selection of local and international brands across 20 different product categories, and take advantage of great prices and enjoy same-day and next-day delivery, as you do with Amazon anywhere around the world. A consortium of Japanese tech companies have unveiled a high-speed 6G prototype device. The wireless 6G device is capable of ultra-high 100 Gbps transmission in the 100 GAZ and 300 GAZ bands at distances of up to 100 meters. This is approximately 20 times faster than current 5G networks. As 5G adoption increases across the continent, the industry is already working on the next generation of cellular technology. The device, which has been in development for the past 3 years, has been in in anticipation of the coming 6G era. Finally, India's foreign exchange reserves rose for the first time in 4 weeks as monetary authorities likely bought dollars. The stockpile increased by $3.7 billion to $641.5 billion as of May the 3rd. Data released by the Reserve Bank of India showed. The pile of assets totaled a record $649 billion in early April, but then declined for 3 straight weeks. Currency interventions are the Reserve Bank of India's tool of choice for crimping volatility in the rupee. Asian currencies, including the yen, the won, and the rupee, have come under pressure versus the dollar as US officials appear likely to keep borrowing costs at elevated levels. And finally, actually, the UK economy has emerged from recession as GDP rose 0.6% in the first quarter, official figures showed on Friday, beating expectations. The UK entered a shallow recession in the second half of 2023 as persistent inflation continued to hurt the economy. Although there is no official definition of a recession, 2 straight quarters of negative growth is widely considered a technical recession. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, whose Tory party recently suffered significant losses at local elections, welcomed the news. On his Twitter handle, he said the economy has turned a corner.